I was recently asked if I watch any woodworking videos on YouTube, and the answer is, of course. In fact, YouTube is where I have learned this hobby. One of my favorite channels has been Jonathan Katz-Moses. A while ago, he did a beautiful inlaid and splined mitered dovetail joint, which is what inspired this video. I decided to take it a step further and make this box. I will link his original video in the description. Now, let's get started. Here are the 4 woods I'll be using throughout this project: lacewood, purple heart, curly maple, and ebony. I pre-cut the dovetails in the purple heart because it is a bit tedious and you don't need to see me cutting yet another set of dovetails in this video. The purple heart inlay will be marked out and glued in first. This will function as a connector between the maple and lacewood. Lastly, but certainly not least, the ebony will serve as the spline for the box corners. It is very important to label your parts, especially when dealing with so many small pieces. I'm a big fan of using these neon stickers and a Sharpie where possible. The first step in laying out inlaid dovetails is to use the marking gauge set to your dovetail depth. The depth won't change for future sets because they will all have the same spacing, so it's best to keep your marking gauge in a safe place. I then use a marking knife to transfer the dovetail spacing onto the maple. I highly recommend using a marking knife over a pencil for hand-cut joinery due to the superior precision offered by a thin blade. Plus, it gives you a physical point of reference. Here, I'm using a sliding bevel to set a consistent 8:1 dovetail ratio. This will help me get into the corner of the workpiece, which will be most important for subsequent steps. I also like to designate the waist sections with a Sharpie to avoid the mistake of cutting into your show face. I will then go ahead and throw my workpiece into my vise and mark out the 90-degree angle on the end grain. This has been transferred by knife lines from the previous steps and will be used to cut the dovetails. As it turns out, I do own one of these acrylic Katz-Moses dovetail jigs, and while it's not a necessary tool for cutting dovetails, I do find it helpful for projects where consistency is key. My preferred method for using these sort of jigs is to place my knife into the marking line and slide the jig up to it. I'll then take my saw and have at it. I know a lot of people prefer to use Japanese hand saws for joinery, but I'm a big fan of the Western style saws. I find that they are just as easy to use once you dial in your technique, albeit the learning curve is kind of a nuisance. But hey, it's all personal preference in the end. My technique does have a flaw where I can only cut on one side of the waist. In this frame, that is the left to right angle you see before you. To remedy this, I simply grab another workpiece and use it for support. I can then rotate my workpiece 180 degrees to cut the other side of the tails. While you could totally remove this waste with the chisel, it is much faster to remove the bulk of it with a coping saw and then finish it up with chisels. Like everything in woodworking, technique gets better with practice through repetition. I can still remember ruining a set of dovetails in mahogany because I couldn't cut a remotely straight line with this coping saw. Yet, I still struggle with it every now and again. With most of the waste removed, I can gradually work back to the marking gauge line with the chisels. It is important not to go for the marking line straight away, because you'll most likely cut through this line and you'll have gaps in the final product. I did some test fitting and got a snug enough fit, so now it's time for glue. If this joint is ever too tight, you can always take a small amount of material off with a file until the fit is just right. I'm using a clamp to drive these in because the Purple Heart is a bit brittle and using a mallet would risk breaking it. Now I can go ahead and wipe off any excess glue with a slightly damp rag and let this dry for a bit. Oh hey, would you look at that? 4 boards with 2 sets of dovetails apiece. Well, anyways, now it's time to make the inlay portion. I measured my spacing to be 3/32 of an inch, so I'll transfer that measurement to my workpiece using calipers and deepen it with a marking knife. And now all I need to do is align the knife with my table saw blade and cut away the excess. With all 4 of my boards cut down, I can mark out the next set of dovetails. I will use the same 3/32 measurement on my calipers from before and use the sliding bevel to mark out the new set of dovetails. Oh, and remember that marking gauge from before? Well, I'm going to be using the same exact measurement now that I've used throughout this project. Hence why it's a good thing I kept it in a safe place. Now, the rest of this process is virtually identical to cutting the dovetails in the maple from earlier, so I hope you enjoy it in 8 times speed. I have to be extra careful while chiseling out the Purple Heart inlay. It is prone to breaking since that 3/32 inch bit of end grain is all that is holding it into place. In fact, I broke this one and had to repair it with epoxy, which is why you will see me filming with another side piece for the next few scenes. After marking out the dovetails in the lacewood, I can go ahead and cut them using the same methods yet again. The nice thing about this project is there are no pins for these dovetails. Only tails on tails on tails. Literally. So after that corny effect, I will go ahead and repeat this process on the remainder of the side pieces. I took a couple days to cut and glue up the rest of the dovetails. It feels good to be done with that portion of the project, but we are still only halfway to a box. The multiple glue ups have resulted in a bit of twisting that I have to remedy before I take any further steps. So I will remove the mini workbench and create a planing surface. Now I do not own a power jointer, but I do own a hand plane and power planer. These woods are highly figured and are thus prone to tear out, so I'll use a toothed plane blade to flatten these, followed up with a trip through my planer. I marked out an 11/16 inch spacing for the corners, and using my combination square, I marked out 45 degrees for the miter joint. I lined up my table saw blade with the knife line, and just like that, we have a miter joint. As Katz-Moses explained in his video, this joint is quite weak without a spline. He used ebony for this purpose, and so shall I. I spent some time dialing in the groove for my spline so it has a flawless fit. It's definitely worthwhile taking some extra time here. Unfortunately, I accidentally wiped my SD card with the footage of gluing up the sides and making the bottom and most of the top of the box. But this is how the sides fit together. Here, I am using a Japanese handsaw to remove the excess ebony pieces. I was also testing the fit of the top panel at this time, so you can see a sneak preview of how it fits together. As for the top, I glued a 1/4 inch thick strip of Purple Heart to some lacewood, and cut more miter joints. In the end, it kind of fits together like a picture frame. I used a tongue and groove router bit set to join the frame to the inner panel of curly maple. It was the most convenient system I could think of to execute this design, and sometimes that's just the best way of doing things. I masked off the inside of my box with painter's tape and paper so the glue up wouldn't be so messy on the inside. Despite my test fitting, the lid was a few thousandths of an inch too wide, so you can see me quickly playing off the sides before pushing it all the way in. Got really lucky that this actually worked, otherwise that would have been a huge mess to try to repair. At this point, I took advantage of the presence of the side rails, so I could easily pre-drill the brass box feet. Because in the next step, I'm going to be bringing the sides of the box flush with the top and bottom panels. Now, the easiest way to flush up the sides is to use a flush trim router bit. I didn't want to take off too much material at a time and risk tear out, so I used the fence in my router table to remove about 1/64 of an inch per pass. With the sides of the box flush with the top and bottom, I can now do the scariest part of this entire project, releasing the top. I measured out a 1/8 inch space between two lacewood tails to accommodate for the width of my table saw blade. Now all I have to do is align the saw blade with these pencil marks and we can begin. I'm using the bottom of my box as my reference face, so I'm positioning it along the table saw fence. I'm just taking it one pass at a time and remaining as calm as I possibly can. For the last pass, I used this gripper to prevent the top or bottom from wiggling and hitting the saw blade, which would have been catastrophic. Luckily, it turned out quite well, and now all I have to do is remove the blue tape from the inside. Now, it's on to installing the hardware. I'm cutting out my box hinges by hand because I find this method is exceptionally accurate, yet quite fun and satisfying. All I need to do is take off tiny bits of material at a time, and the hinge should fit like a glove. I chose a nice brass slash to go with this box, and it will be inserted into the front. To accomplish this, I used a jig and my handheld router, because I thought it would be kind of hard to cut out rounded corners by hand. I think I definitely made the right choice with this method. After all, just look at that fit. Now we've reached the finishing stage. I spent a good amount of time sanding every surface of this box with 220 grit sandpaper, and now I'll be using my spray gun to apply a satin lacquer finish. Lacquer is really easy to apply, dries quickly, and gives the box ample protection. Oh, and by the way, did I mention it's just plain beautiful? I'm really happy with the color combination and how they've popped with the finish. I'll install the hardware later, because for now I'll be buffing the finish smooth with 4-0 steel wool and some paste wax. This combination gives the box a wonderful tactile quality and pretty great smell. I masked off the latch mortises with some frog tape so as not to get super glue all over my nice lacquer clear coat. Now it's just a matter of installing the hardware. I have to say, I am really happy with how this box turned out. I think the color combination of these woods is impeccable. I'm glad I took the time to make it by hand. I could have saved myself countless hours by using power tools to cut the dovetails, but you can't deny the satisfaction of cutting them by hand. Well, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and all that YouTube stuff. For now, enjoy these detail shots.